Thank you, Susan. Dr. Langley, thank you. That was wonderful. Hello, everyone. I am so happy to see you all here today. My name is Diane Donovan Harrison, and I am with the Calvert County Historical Society. I will be talking about how the local community responded following the sinking of the Levin J Marvel. And I think some of you will probably recognize familiar names. But first, can you just imagine sailing along the magnificent waters of the Chesapeake Bay under sunny blue skies and three masts of billowing white sails? An advertisement that appeared in East Coast newspapers in 1955 painted quite an alluring picture of the Marvel. It read, "Beneath billowing sail, the clear moonlight makes a phosphorescent wake which gleams like diamonds. Your sailing cruise will be an event long remembered. Witness the beautiful sunrise and sunset on the Chesapeake. The nostalgia and romance of a sailing adventure awaits you." End of quote. In contrast, the Washingtonian magazine ran an in-depth story on the Marvel written by Drew Lindsay in their August 1st, 2003 edition. It was titled, "Mayday, Mayday." We have it printed for you out in the lobby on the exhibits table. It's very informative. The caption under this title read, "As Hurricane Connie moved up the Atlantic coast, 27 people set sail from Annapolis on a cruise that promised moonlit romance, shipboard fun, and great crab cakes. It was to be a dream vacation." Again, end of quote. The story of the Levin J Marvel is not just a story about a sailing adventure. It is also a story about courage, about a duck blind, about loopholes, and yes, about unforgettable crab cakes. It is a story filled with courtroom drama and surprises. And sadly, it is a story about the tragic loss of life. It is also a story of ordinary people becoming extraordinary heroes. Captain John Meckling was the unlicensed ship's captain at the helm of the 64-year-old ram schooner that had been converted for vacation cruises. The Marvel departed Annapolis on Monday, August the 8th, 1955. She sailed to Poplar Island and then to the fishing village of Oxford on the Tread Avon River, where the passengers enjoyed dinner at the famous Robert Morris Inn, and also after dinner caught a little bit of Dragnet on TV and this new television show called The $64,000 Question. Then, next day, it was on to Cambridge on the Choptank River with souvenir shopping in town. The Marvel then set back to Poplar Island. The passengers were from different walks of life and locations along the East Coast. As promised, they enjoyed carefree swimming parties, deck games, stargazing, and yes, Cook Ellery Pinckney's famous and unforgettable crab cakes. Usually, after dinner, the passengers engaged in lively and convivial conversation that could last for hours and hours. Storm warnings and a hurricane alert had been issued for the mid-Atlantic, but then a change predicted that Hurricane Connie would move inland at about Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. Still, though, Captain Meckling decided not to stay on the eastern shore, but to return to Annapolis. The Marvel headed north and crossed the Chesapeake Bay in very rough water and 45-mile-per-hour winds. She got as far as Herring Bay, where the captain sought to find safe harbor. But soon it became obvious that Connie was going to get the best of the Marvel. Captain Meckling made sure all of the passengers were accounted for and in life jackets. The Marvel broke apart at 2:40 p.m. on August the 12th, 1955. It was located 1.5 miles east of Holland Point, which is between Fairhaven and North Beach. Struggling in the turbulent water, and on instruction from the captain, some of the passengers held hands to stay together in groups of 5. Some had a rope going through their life jackets to stay together. There were even at least 2 passengers who were able to grab onto large pieces of floating debris. Deborah Killip was a single, athletic 26-year-old from Rochester, New York, who worked in advertising and loved an adventure. John Ferguson was 17 years old from New Jersey on a dream sailing trip of a lifetime with his dad. John is here with us today, and you will hear of John's personal recollections next in the program. Alone on their own flotsam and very rough surf, both John and Deborah drifted separately in a southerly direction, not knowing if they were even heading towards the shore. And even as they would get closer, the strong undertow would take them back out. Meanwhile, back ashore in what was then called North Beach Park, and according to Donald Chomet's excellent book, Shipwrecks on the Chesapeake, brothers Bob and Arthur Qualley were standing in front of the family's beachfront cottage, watching the bay with awe. The fury of Hurricane Connie and her winds coming up the bay, although now reduced to gale force winds. In what had to be utter disbelief, as the 2 men gazed out at the turbulent surf, was the surreal vision of a human figure struggling to make it to shore. One brother jumped in the water to help bring Marvel passenger Deborah Killip, and the other brother ran to the cottage to alert his mother-in-law, Edwina Fox, to call the North Beach Volunteer Fire Department. Deborah Killip said there had been 27 people on board the schooner Levin J Marvel, and it had shipwrecked in the bay. It was Edwina who first notified the authorities. Besides calling the North Beach Volunteer Fire Department, she called the Coast Guard in Baltimore and the Maryland State Police. Captain Dick Marshall of the Maryland State Police in Deal was notified and immediately answered the call. It was now 4:15, August the 12th. The location of the Qualley Cottage was several houses up from First and Beach Avenue in North Beach Park, just north of the Calvert-Anne Arundel County line. Shortly before Deborah made it to shore, young John Ferguson reached the shore a little north of Deborah's location. After floating for what seemed like hours on the deckhouse debris, John could eventually see land and realize the water was shallow enough for him to walk to shore. Emergency responders were there to assist him. The Calvert County Sheriff, Sam Lyons, and the Deputy Sheriff, Leland Bowen, were notified. Calvert County had 3 state troopers at that time: Trooper Donald Gibson, Trooper Pat Wall, Trooper Noble Collison, notified. Shown in the picture here with Sheriff Lyons and Deputy Sheriff Bowen. North Beach Town Councilman Harold Touche, North Beach Chief of Police Willard S. Ward, and North Beach Fire Chief Joyce Sherbert were notified. Fire Chief Sherbert and his wife Thelma privately owned the first ambulance in Calvert County. Shown here in front of their ambulance, Thelma Sherbert frequently drove the ambulance on calls. She was notified. The North Beach Mayor, Robert Meade, was notified, and he is shown standing in the picture. Responding organizations came from Calvert, Anne Arundel, Prince George's, and Montgomery counties. Besides the Coast Guard, the Navy amphibious plane as well as helicopters searched the waters. Company A, 121st Engineer Battalion of the National Guard in Prince Frederick, was activated for transportation purposes. Frankie Wood and Donald Austin Bowen drove the National Guard truck. The fire department at the Chesapeake Bay Annex of the Naval Research Lab at Randall Cliff would assist North Beach on many calls, and so, of course, they responded to this unfolding emergency. George Arts was the commanding officer at the time, and Bill Broom from North Beach was the fire chief. On a side note, at the same time, 400 Boy Scouts and their leaders were camping at Camp Roosevelt, which is located just south of the Naval Research Lab. All 400 Scouts and their leaders were evacuated from Camp Roosevelt and sheltered at the Naval Research Lab during the storm. Norman Broyles was a volunteer fireman at the Deal Fire Station. He was at home weathering the storm with his family when he heard the sirens blaring. He knew something awful had just happened. He followed the fire truck to the beach at Rose Haven, which is Harrington Harbor today, where the body of a child had already washed ashore there. There were 2 children on board from the same family, a 9-year-old girl and a 13-year-old boy. Norman was asked to establish radio relay between the responders. Communications was a huge problem. First of all of the emergency organizations were on different frequencies. Landlines were down. The North Beach Fire Station radio tower had blown over, and as a result, the state police barracks in Waldorf became the lead. Now, having said this, in a small, tight-knit community such as the Beaches, word of mouth traveled at lightning speed. At about 6 p.m., August the 12th, 5 passengers, including the captain, reached a rickety duck blind located due east about 1,000 feet just south of the Calvert and Anne Arundel County line off of North Beach. Another passenger, Perry Schwartz, had made it to the duck blind minutes before then. They had been in the water almost 4 hours and actually had traveled quite a distance from where the Marvel went down in Herring Bay. The duck blind became a temporary sanctuary for the 6 exhausted passengers. Cold and wet, they wrapped themselves in tar paper for protection against the wind. One of the passengers, Nancy Madden, had been wearing a yellow rain slicker hat that, believe it or not, was still tied around her neck when she got into the duck blind. The bright yellow hat became their distress flag as they frantically waved the hat in hopes that someone on shore would or even could see them. They could see headlines on cars on the road. With word of the shipwreck and that there were survivors on the duck blind, charter boat captains from the local area immediately set out to rescue the survivors. With the passage of time, it is no way to know the names of all, but 3 men who did attempt rescue efforts from the rod and reel dock were Captain Shaker Black, shown here on the bridge of the rod and reel charter boat Porky, seen in calmer water. Captain Bill Bloodsworth on his boat, the Sylvia. And this picture of Captain Jack Abbott and the Smoky Joe. However, the trough between the crest of the waves was too shallow, and the charter boats bottomed out, forcing them to return to the dock. Navigating the harbor between the two jetties was another challenge for the charter boats in the gale force wind, and the north jetty is seen in the Smoky Joe picture. You can see it in the background there. So it became urgently apparent that only a small boat would be able to navigate the trough and shallow depth of the water, but in 8 to 10 feet plus waves, it would be extremely dangerous. A frantic search for a small boat, a motor, and sufficient gas ensued on the shoreline among the neighbors living in North Beach Park. Grace Meade Garrett Reimer lived at First and Beach Avenue. She, along with the neighbors, the Teppers, volunteered a 12-foot skiff equipped with a 15-horsepower outboard motor that they were hoping had sufficient gas. Billy McWilliams and George Kellum were volunteer firemen with the North Beach Volunteer Fire Department. They knew exactly what they had to do. Billy was a 32-year-old World War II Navy veteran. George was a 29-year-old construction worker and a World War II veteran, having served in the Marine Corps. To the cheers of about 70 people now gathered on the beach, and without any regard for their own safety, the two daring men jumped in the small boat. Billy manned the outboard motor, following a zigzag course to avoid going directly into the wind and waves, while George bailed out water, at times as much as 6 inches of water in the boat. Sometimes they could not see the duck blind for the blinding rain, and they were not even sure they were headed towards the duck blind, although both men knew the bay very well. With fierce determination and gritting on a big unlit cigar that never left George's lips, they made it to the duck blind. From point A on the beach to point B at the duck blind, it was estimated 2,000 feet. Already dilapidated, the duck blind was very unstable, with the weight of 6 people plus gale force winds and 8 to 10 foot plus waves. With little hope for survival, how must these 6 exhausted, desolate people have felt when they saw 2 men coming through the pelting rain to rescue them? When Billy and George got to the duck blind, George, who was a big, strong man at 6'2" and 240 pounds, grabbed a piling with one hand and pulled passenger Merle Hutchinson into the boat with the other hand, while Billy manned the motor, which is not easy to do in 8 to 10 feet waves. Next in was 17-year-old Steve Morton, who had been a mate on the boat. The small boat could only hold 4 people at a time. With great expediency, Billy headed back to shore with the 2 rescued passengers. Now they could see the red flashing emergency lights on the vehicles, and the trip back was at a more direct angle at 1,700 feet. As the boat approached the beach, the North Beach Volunteer Fire Department had organized a human chain of men to wade out to meet the boat. The men held on to a long, heavy, knotted rope and grabbed the survivors as they came in, so Billy and George could immediately turn around and go back to the duck blind for the remaining passengers. This was a definite race against time. It would be impossible to know the names of all the men who were part of this human chain and rescue effort that night, but we do know the names of some for certain whom we have been told were helping on the beach. Ray Brooks, Bill Carey, Ronald Essex, Joe Hook, Mike Vitale, Smokey Ward, Harold Touche, Tom Tizzola, Russell Hall, and Jimmy Buckmaster. With great urgency, Billy and George, still gritting his unlit cigar, quickly turned the boat around and made a second harrowing trip to the duck blind for 2 more passengers. This time, Nancy Madden, shown in the picture, and Frances Roberts were brought back to safety. Frances Roberts' daughter, Maggie, is here with us today, and you will hear from her next in today's program. On the last trip, they picked up Perry Schwartz and the Marvel captain, John Meckling. Captain Meckling was the last to leave the duck blind, and within minutes of Meckling getting in the rescue boat, the duck blind collapsed into the bay. In the meantime, 5 other passengers had made it safely to various locations along the western shore, including the cook, Ellery Pinkney, and the steward, Charles Savoy. And 2 passengers, Harry Nathanson from Lawrence, New Jersey, and Charles Greenwald from New York City, are shown here with Deborah Killip in a picture that was taken at the Calvert County Hospital after their rescue. Passenger William Bell from New York City also made it to shore. Sadly, eventually, so did the bodies of 14 people who did not make it to shore, including the parents and 2 children in the Nevin family from Brooklyn, New York, John Ferguson's dad, Sr., who had hoped to share a lifetime sailing experience with his son, and Bert Roberts, the husband of Frances, who was rescued in the duck blind. It became apparent that for the passengers trying to swim there, a grave danger for them was being battered against the seawall, the piers, and the jetties. Nighttime darkness was quickly approaching in another race for time. Jimmy Buckmaster was a volunteer fireman with the North Beach Volunteer Fire Department who had been helping with the duck blind rescue on the beach. In the darkness, he knew the fire department searchlight shining from the end of the North Jetty at Fishing Creek would be a clear vantage point to search the water and also to provide a beacon to anyone possibly struggling in the water. The rocks on the jetties at that time were all flat-topped, massive boulders. On sunny summer days, it was great fun to walk out on the jetties. However, in the darkness, with gale-force winds, crashing waves, pelting rain, and very slippery rocks, it would be extremely dangerous. Not thinking of his own safety, Jimmy went all the way out to the last rock on the jetty with the searchlight. And Jimmy's family is here. His daughters are here, and I'd like to say thank you for your dad's service. When Jimmy came off of the jetty, totally drenched to the core, he passed the searchlight to his buddy, Hank Walkie, from Friendship, Maryland. Hank, again, with no concern for his own safety and in the perilous conditions just described, immediately went back out to the end of the jetty in a desperate and hopeful search for survivors. Is Hank here today? Hank was, yay! Thank you, Hank. Well, I'd like to introduce Hank to you all and acknowledge your bravery that night and say thank you for your courageous rescue effort on the last rock of the jetty on that terrible night. Thank you very much, Hank. As the search and rescue effort turned into search and recovery, another human chain was formed on the North Jetty the next day. Now daylight, there were many who traversed the wet, slippery rocks, still in storm conditions, but now also amidst Marvel debris washing up against the jetty. Again, we do not know the names of all the men, and there were many who went out on the jetty, but we do know the names of some for certain. Gordon Stinnett was a veteran of World War II who served in the Army at Normandy, and he was a manager of the Rod and Reel restaurant. Buddy Killam, who was the brother of duck-blind rescuer George Killam, also was actively involved in the water search. Killam Field in Chesapeake Beach is named after Buddy. Other men who should be recognized that we know definitely went out in that jetty are Chuck Klein, Floyd Gross, Zane King, Wesley Stinnett, and my dad, Fred Donovan Sr. The doctors and nurses at Calvert County Hospital and the Anne Arundel County General Hospital treated these survivors. The North Beach Volunteer Fire Department, located at 4th and Dayton, was designated as the temporary morgue. Today, it is the location of the Bayside History Museum. Dr. Hugh Ward was the Calvert County coroner at the time. This quote from the September 1st, 1955 edition of the Calvert Independent sums up the man that so many of us here today remember and respected. It reads, "To Dr. Hugh Ward, the coroner, who was in charge of the 9 bodies in the fire hall, go our thanks for his efficient, quiet way of giving strength to others in time of stress." End of quote. Thelma Sherbert was the president of the Ladies Auxiliary at the time and is shown driving her ambulance. The assistance and efforts of the Ladies Auxiliary was very significant and greatly appreciated. Some of the other members of the Ladies Auxiliary who were confirmed to have been there that night are Elsie Touche, Rena Ward, Sue Ward, Dolores Tucker, Flossie Vitale, and Clara Mae Buckmaster. Because of the search and rescue and then the ongoing search and recovery efforts, the Calvert Independent cited that many of the businesses in the beaches generously contributed whatever they could to the ongoing search effort in the days that followed. It would be, again, impossible to know the generosity of all of the businesses, but we do know for sure Miss Emma of Ewald's Restaurant in North Beach contributed greatly with her continuous all-night serving of hot coffee and sandwiches to the rescue workers. Wesley and Elizabeth Stinnett owned Stinnett's Restaurant and the Rod and Reel. Wesley was also the mayor of Chesapeake Beach at the time of the Marvel tragedy. Typical of the generous and kind spirit of Wesley Stinnett, Stinnett's Restaurant, a much-loved landmark in the beaches, was also there for the rescue workers. It, too, was lost to a hurricane, Hurricane Isabel, in 2003. Debris continued to wash ashore for days following the sinking of the Marvel. Ray Brooks was a North Beach volunteer fireman who had been on the beach helping with the human chain to grab survivors as they came in the motorboat rescue. Several days later, he discovered the washed-up Marvel debris of a large wooden torn-apart structure that had a U.S. Navy bell attached to it. He removed the bell from the wood and kept the bell in his barn for 60 years. It is believed, we don't know for sure, but we are making an assumption that the U.S. Navy bell was salvaged to serve as the Marvel's dinner bell. And we have the dinner bell on display over here for you to see, courtesy of Bayside History Museum. After all of the 14 bodies had been recovered, well-deserved praise and accolades for the extraordinary courage and bravery of McWilliams and Kellum followed. Commendations came from the Maryland Governor McKeldin, the Commandant of the Coast Guard, and the Elks Club. One of the many awards bestowed upon McWilliams and Kellum was the prestigious Carnegie Hero Medal. The Carnegie Award was established by Andrew Carnegie in 1904 to recognize outstanding acts of selfless heroism performed in the United States and Canada. It is awarded to those who risk their lives to an extraordinary degree while saving or attempting to save the lives of others. One of the passengers they had rescued from the duck blind, Nancy Madden of Washington, D.C., nominated them for this award. The Chesapeake Bay Fishing Fair Association also nominated the two men for the Carnegie Medal. I would like to read to you briefly an excerpt from the letter Nancy Madden wrote to the Carnegie Hero Fund Commission on August the 17th, 1955, 5 days after the rescue. It reads, "Those two men risked their lives to get us under circumstances which the six of us did not think possible. The duck blind would not last long, we were sure. We did not think anyone could possibly reach us in time. The storm was getting worse all the time instead of abating. The captain was evidently sure we would be battered to death on the jetties or the piers, so he had us get in the duck blind and he pulled us up the ladder." End of quote. Our community came together that terrible night in 1955. Ordinary folks became extraordinary heroes, collectively and without hesitation, in an attempt to rescue and save the shipwrecked passengers of the Levin J Marvel. Today, the site of the dramatic duck blind rescue is a nature preserve called Walton's Beach, located on Bay Avenue in North Beach and just south of the Calvert-Anne Arundel County line. After the sinking of the Marvel occurred, there was a riveting court case, a Coast Guard inquiry, and boating safety laws were changed forever. Today's symposium will delve into all of the fascinating aspects of the story of the Levin J Marvel by people who were eyewitnesses to Marvel history.